Hello everyone, good evening, welcome, and thanks for joining us for the penultimate lockdown Q&A in our 2021 series. Tonight we are privileged to be joined by Mike Brearley, a multi-talented individual who has pursued a career as a writer and psychoanalyst since retiring from cricket, serving as president of the British Psychoanalytical Society between 2008 and 2010. He was MCC president 2007-2008, is now an elected member of the MCC committee, and was, of course, England captain in the late 1970s and early 1980s, winning 17 test matches and losing only 4. I will shortly be asking John Fingleton to provide a more detailed introduction to our guest, but in the meantime, please may I, as usual, remind all of you to make sure your microphones are muted unless you're asking a question. Our first questions this evening come from Nick Mater, Max Sawyer and Derek Wheeler. So would you please be ready when Fingers concludes his opening remarks? Now, we've received a record number of requests to take part tonight, so regrettably, we will not have time for any additional questions. I would also ask those who are joining in to keep their questions brief so that we'll have plenty of time to hear from Mike and as many other members as possible in the hour or so we have available. Over to you, Fingers.
Thank you very much indeed, James. It is an enormous pleasure to introduce a man I've known for oh God knows how many years, 40, 50 years. I once shared a train back to London from Edgbaston with his father, so that's going back with Horace. We'd both been up there for the day, not together, but we happened to be on the same carriage. But if anyone's got nothing to prove, it's J.M. Brearley, because I mean, he's always been accepted, I think, as the best, not necessarily the best batsman, but probably by, or do I mean batter, but by a street, I think, the best captain of England for many, many, many years. He captained 31 tests, won 17, lost 4, drew 10. He then became president, as James had told you, of the British Psychoanalyst Society. He was Middlesex captain from 71 to 82, during which time they won 4 county championships. Not quite sure what's gone wrong since. Probably the captaincy, but he was a brilliant. But the one thing I would refute, there was a little story about him in my friend Patrick Kidd's diary in the Times last week, suggesting that Nancy Doyle, the great and unforgettable players' dining room chef at Lord's, attributed to him words that I don't think he would ever use. The F word, about when he suggested that rather than have steak and kidney pie for every lunch, could they be lighter food? And I don't believe that she would have dreamt of saying to him, "You worry about the effing cricket and I'll do the effing food." But it wouldn't be his style at all. But it is a huge pleasure to have him, and I'm going to ask you to take it back and start the questions, I think.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Fingers. Well, our first question comes from Nick Mater. Nick, have I pronounced your name right?
That's fine, James, that'll do.
Go ahead.
So, Mike, good evening. This is probably the closest I'll ever come to opening the batting with you, so I'm very honoured to have the first question. And my question is this. In the Indian Premier League, a number of players, both foreign and domestic, can go through the whole tournament without playing a single game. Particularly when a player is in a bubble, as is so topical these days, how damaging can this be for the individual, and what can be done for his well-being? Thank you.
Thank you. It's always been a problem. I mean, how reserves, substitutes, we didn't really have substitutes then, but substitutes, people not in the team, especially people who thought they should be in the team, how one included, accommodated, made the best of things for them, understood what it was like. And I think it is a job of management and or captaincy to be aware of what it feels like not to be in the team. We in 1980, when we had the best team we ever had at Middlesex, you know, with I think a whole team of international players, was the year Vincent van der Baal played as well as Wayne Daniel, and we had a terrific team. There were 1 or 2 situations, you know, 15 or 16 could easily have played in the team, but you could only put 11 on the field at any one time. And I got a bit frustrated at some point in the season when I thought people were sulking or feeling, you know, not being very helpful once they'd been left out, and couldn't see the point of it, even though if it was needed, I'd tried to explain it to them. And then Roland Butcher said, yes, he said, that's true, but have any of you thought what it's like to be left out of this team? And we didn't quite know what he meant, and so we asked him, and he said, well, you sort of kicked out of the dressing room, you have to change in one of those other changing rooms along the corridor at Lord's, and people don't talk to you the same way they did before. And I thought that was an extremely insightful remark, you know, painful and probably true, no doubt, with a lot of truth in it. I don't think it was that they were being malicious, but I think you didn't feel quite the same to someone who wasn't in the actual team. And you probably felt slightly embarrassed. You didn't quite know what to say. You knew they were hurt, you know that they were disappointed, and you tended to be a bit quiet. And I think that came across as excluding. And so I did at various times try to include people like people on tour who didn't play in the test matches, and you know, trying to get their opinion. I remember John Lever didn't play in some test matches and was terrifically helpful noticing what was going on in the team. So I think one has to do one's best. It's not easy, and it may have got worse for two reasons. One, the IPL, which has to have a certain number of local Indian players, you know, of a certain age group and so on, which is not a bad thing, but it means that sometimes they won't get many or any games. And secondly, because of the bubble. And the bubble must make life worse for top cricketers. I remember reading about the Indian team, Indian players who were in the IPL and who were going to have 3 or 4 days before, or 1 or 2 days before they went off to Australia for 3 months, you know, without speaking to anyone outside the bubble. That's pretty agonizing, imagine it. No, I mean, I'm being serious. I think it's a difficult thing to cope with. And just even more generally, I think that sometimes it's a very good thing for people to get away from the atmosphere of the team. And I think that pressure has increased, if anything, since my day, to make people sort of show their team spirit in very hearty ways, you know, always want to be with the team, always have to be rather extrovert, lots of people sitting around watching them. Whereas in my day, there were just, you know, 12 players or 16 players, whatever it was, and one manager and a physio, you know, it was about it. So it's a good question. I think the general answer is only with difficulty and only with care.
Thank you very much, Mike, and thanks, Nick, for the question. We're going to have two members now asking questions together because they are similar about captaincy. So first of all, Max Sawyer, would you like to ask your question, please?
I will. Good evening, Mike.
Good evening.
Captaincy is 90% skill and 10% luck, but don't try it without that 10%. Was Richie Benno right about that?
Thanks, Max. And Derek, would you like to come in and ask your question as well, please?
Yeah, sure. Again, welcome, Mike. Delighted to have you with us tonight. In last week's Times, Mike Atherton wrote one of his insightful articles about county championship captaincy and how they gain the necessary experience. And further, how does that impact upon becoming the England captain, and how do they get the necessary skill set that they need? Thank you.
Thank you very much, both. I think, by the way, that Richie Benno, I think got it the wrong way around. Sorry, it was Max, because I think he said 90% luck and 10% skill, I think. And I don't actually agree with that. I mean, I think there's a great deal of luck, especially in the short run, but I don't think the actual impact of a captain is only 10% skill. And one of the reasons it might seem so is that if you're a captain of a poor side, then your skill will be shown by your making that poor side into a decent side, not into an earth-shattering side. And if you're a bad captain of an excellent team, your lack of skill will be shown in reducing them to an ordinary team, not turning them into a poor team. So people tend to go too much by recent results, ignoring the strength of the other side and ignoring the strength of the players. And so it's very hard to get a proper assessment. But actually, I think that it's even rarer to get people who can really manage players with skill than it is to get people who can play with skill, which is also rare with the requisite skill. So I would say it's more like 50-50 than Richie would say, to come back to that question. And the second question about county championship, I think it's a big difference from in the present from my day. In my day, a lot of captains, and some of the good ones like Ray Illingworth and Brian Close, Keith Fletcher for that matter, who I thought was a much better captain than he was given credit for, were people who'd had a long apprenticeship in county cricket, and they'd learnt the skill. You know, they'd learnt it in a slightly less exposing environment than Test cricket or international cricket. And they probably were older when they started captaining as well. Ian Botham, of course, that wasn't true of. I mean, he was captain of England when he was 23 or 24. And I thought he should be the next captain after me in 1980. Yes, 80. But I think I was wrong. And I think that it's very difficult. There's a lot of different skills involved. You know, there's the tactics and strategy and so on, but there's also getting the best out of other people and treating people both fairly and individually differently. I like the story of Ray Illingworth in Australia when Bob Willis went out and we won the series in Australia. And a lot of it was to do with Raymond, I think. And his best bowler was John Snow. And he said, and John Snow was a slightly difficult figure to captain, though a very agreeable and intelligent fellow as well. And if you could get him on your side, I think you were doing well, and you were in a good position. But he decided, Raymond, that he was his key player, and that until the first test, there were probably 6 state matches before the first test, or something like that, 5 or 6. John Snow had to train, practice, do everything everyone else had to do. But after the test matches started, it was up to him how he kept himself fit and ready to play. And he trusted him to do that. And the rest of the team knew that Snow was being treated differently. He could go off for a couple of days. He wasn't asked to be 12th man, or hardly at all, you know, and he was treated with a different regime. And people understood it. It was out in the open. It was sensible. It made sense. He was going to be pretty exhausted if he bowled 40 overs a test match and took, I don't know, 8 wickets a test match. And, you know, so there's one of the problems for a captain. He's got to have the authority and the strength of character to decide that and work it through and get it across to the team. So I think that it's more than, as I say, more than 10% skill.
Thank you. Thank you, Max, and thank you, Derek. Next question then from Noel Kearns. Noel.
Thank you, James. Good evening, Michael, and thanks for joining us.
Good evening.
Right, let me just set a little scenario here. I'm the lucky one that gets the 1981 Headingley question. So, cast our minds back. Australia go out. John Dyson gets a century. And I think Kim Hughes got a few runs. And they set a significant target. In we come, all out for 174, I think. Both of the second top scorer behind golden balls was extras. Then we come to the follow on, and of course, you know, there we go. But golden balls is out there, hitting it in an innings that we shall remember forever. I was lucky enough I was just below board level at the company I was working, and the directors had their own restroom, and as each day went on, I spent more time in front of the television with their permission, most of day 4 and 5. So building up then to the Australian second innings, this is where I'd like to take you, and it was a two-pronged question, if I may. Firstly, what was your structural thought process and how you were going to go set about that 4th innings? And alongside that, how did you manage Dylan Willis, or did it not require managing. I remember in 2009 watching Freddie in that, clearing up the innings, and he was basically saying when he would be bowling. So what I wanted to do is ask how that day 5 was for you, for that memorable Bob Willis 8-4. Thank you.
Okay. Well, we knew we had a chance. There's a nice story about Len Hutton saying that when Tyson hit Neil Harvey on the shin in the state match before the first test in the series he captained in Australia, Neil Harvey, he said, had to take his pad off to rub his leg. And then I knew we had a chance, Len said. Anyway, so I knew we had a chance, but it was a real outside chance. I mean, they wanted 130 to win. It was a poor pitch. I mean, 400 was double par score for that pitch. And so, it wasn't that we'd actually batted particularly badly until the famous stand between Ian and Graham Dilley. So the night before, one thing had happened was that we were having a drink, glass of beer. I don't mean we were getting drunk. That's the night of the fourth day. And we were kind of excited by what had happened in the course of the day. We'd taken our suitcases back to the hotel, checked back in. No, we hadn't checked out, but we'd got ready to check out. And a few of us were chatting with Bob Willis, and Bob was not confident. He'd not been very well. He'd had a chest infection. He'd had a rash of no balls, so he was trying to cut his run-in down and run in more slowly. And Headingley's a notoriously difficult place with the slope for fast bowlers. They often overstep. He bowled a few no balls, I think, in the first innings. He'd been not sure himself whether he was really genuinely any longer the strike bowler, or would he be a fast medium bowler who moved the ball a bit and bowled a bit, first change perhaps. And Graham Dilley, in fact, I gave the new ball to in the second innings. I remember, I think it was Mike Gatting, or it might have been Graham Gooch, saying to him, or it might have been Ian Botham, saying to him in the evening, next morning, he said, what you've got to do is bowl as fast and straight as you can. The pitch will do the rest. Don't think about anything else. Don't think about no balls. Don't think about your chest. Don't think about your legs. Don't think about anything. Just run in and bowl quick and straight. Sometimes the simplest things are the best advice, And it was like you might say to someone on a village green. And it was exactly like that. Bowl fast, bowl straight. Don't think about anything else. And, if you get it right on this pitch, they won't be able to play you, which was true, because the ball came through at different heights and it moved off the seam every now and again. But the height variation was particularly difficult. You didn't know whether a short ball was going to come at chest height or just above the knee, or hit you on the shin, to come back to the shin. So that was one thing. And the second thing that people often still ask me, was how did I decide to change Bob Willis around to the other end, to run down the hill? And actually, I think it came from him. He had started the match started the second inning saying he wanted to bowl up the hill because of this no ball worry, and he was afraid of coming in too fast, losing control, bowling no balls, losing confidence. So he'd started off bowling up the hill, and he bowled pretty well. And he said, give me a go up the hill. Or he may have said it to Bob Taylor. And Bob Taylor said it to me, and I said, well, let's just think a minute. So I think I let him bowl one more over up the hill. And then I thought, yes, let's give it a go. So, and then he bowled that well, it's to me famous over before lunch, which took them from 56 for 1 to 56 for 4. Or maybe it was in 2 overs. There were 2 excellent catches. Someone was caught off the glove. Dyson was caught off the glove, hooking, I think. Oh, no. Trevor Chappell was caught gloving the ball over his head to Bob Taylor. Then Kim Hughes was caught at second slip very well by Ian Botham. And then Yallop was caught at short leg by Gatt diving forward. So 56 for 4. And then we had more than a chance. Actually, one of the most important things after lunch was that was lunch. After lunch was Chris Old bowling about 7 overs or 8 overs. The first 7 of those 8 overs went for about 6 runs, I think, and he got Alan Border out with an in-swinger that went off the inside edge onto the leg stump. And at the other end, Bob was bowling, and it was obviously going to be, he'd bowl until the end, because whatever happened, he was the most dangerous bowler by far. And Chris Old had done a terrific job at the other end. And it was only in his last over when Ray Bright really picked up a couple of balls over mid-wicket from middle stump for 4s. And at the other end, Dennis Lilly scored some quick runs too. I mean, in the context of the match, we started to get a bit worried again. So that was the way we thought about, or I thought about it, and we thought about it in the course of that last day. I wanted to give Dilly a bowl, probably just an over or two, partly because of his innings the day before. But if he got it right, he was a fine bowler, and he was capable of bowling quickly. And again, on that pitch, the quicker you did it, the more difficult it was to play, unless you were Alderman, who bowled every ball in the right place.
Thank you. Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Noel. We're going to have another double question now. So I'd ask first Peter Hart and then John Wilson to ask a question before Mike replies. Peter.
Thanks, James. Thanks, Mike. Thanks for joining us this evening.
Thank
I've
you.
enjoyed reading your book very much, Mike Brearley on cricket. I've loved it. And there's a very good chapter in it on the Reverend David Shepherd, and also a very good chapter on Basil D'Oliveira, who was one of my heroes. Both of you were involved in the special general meeting of MCC in December 1968. He proposed it and you seconded it. And as we know, Basil hadn't been selected for the South African tour. I was at the Oval as a 12-year-old and I saw him get the 158. I know you toured South Africa in 1964, 65, and stayed on after the tour, after the MCC tour, and were quite appalled by what you saw in the compounds. And when you did a series of interviews with John Arlott in Alderney towards the end of his life in 1984, you both talked about South Africa, and he said how he'd been asked what race he belonged to when he went to South Africa. In your book, in terms of the SGM, you say MCC won the vote but lost the war. Jack Bailey's book, he says, MCC won it thanks to the formidable weapon of the postal vote. In David Shepherd's autobiography, which I've also loved, he talks of the vitriol with a member saying, "How can the Bishop of Woolwich wear his MCC tie?" And somebody says, "Down his back." So it must have been quite a tumultuous meeting. I'd particularly like to ask two things, really. The Reverend David Shepherd comes across as a remarkable man, someone who could have played cricket and gone and got a nice job in a school, but chose to go to the church and work in inner cities. And I've been to Liverpool. They hold him in the very highest of esteem. So any sort of thoughts and memories of what a remarkable man, and also your thoughts on that special general meeting now. And thank you for, for standing up at the time to apartheid, and thank goodness people like you did at the time.
Thank you, Peter. And can we bring in John Wilson before you give your answer, Mike? John.
Mike, good evening. Before I ask the question, a note of personal thanks. You're one of the few elected committee members who always has the kindness and courtesy to respond to emails. It's greatly appreciated, and thank you for doing that.
Thank you.
My question follows on from Peter's, in that you, as you said, you famously opposed the MCC committee over South Africa. What are your recollections of that period, and what lessons did you learn from that experience?
I like your question. By the way, you don't live on that chair, do you, in the long room there?
Well, it's the closest any of us have got for such a long time. In fact, I think of anyone here, I yourself excluded, I'm the last in the long room because I got to go to the SGM last October. So, so yes,
yeah.
Closest.
Thank you both for those questions or comments. Yes, David Shepherd. I think he was a very fine man, and I was very fond of him. I think he probably, I first came across him, well, apart from seeing him on television or reading about him in the newspapers as a cricketer, I first came across him when I was in my first or second year at Cambridge, and he preached a sermon in, I think it was Lesser St Mary's. Anyway, it was a church in the centre of Cambridge. And I was a bit intimidated by the sort of fierceness of his evangelism. And I think he became a more he was a bit sort of public school, a bit forceful in those days, I thought. But he then worked in the East End, at the Mayflower Centre, and then became suffragan bishop, that means second division bishop of Woolwich, and lived in the southeast London, and before he went to Liverpool. And I think he sort of became more down to earth, he was a person who could really listen to people and really engage with people from all across the board. Whereas I think when he played cricket for Sussex, I heard stories about, that he sort of was a little bit evangelist. Anyway, by the time I got to meet him about the D'Oliveira affair, which is when I met him personally, I liked him very much indeed. And what can I say about him? He was quite tough. There are stories about him as a captain, playing tricks on the field. I don't mean necessarily dishonourable tricks, but coming, very keen on winning. He wasn't just a nice chap. He played hard, and he expected other people to play hard. He was very gracious. He was very generous. When he was dying of cancer, I spoke to him and asked him how his night had been the night before, and he said he had half a good night. And I thought most people would have focused on the other half. He was in considerable pain and distress. So he was courageous. I thought he was courageous in another way, that he stood up against apartheid, both by not playing against the South Africans long before the D'Oliveira affair, whereas I did, and by the D'Oliveira affair and afterwards in various ways. But when in the late 80s, in other words, 20 years after the D'Oliveira affair, almost 20 years, Ali Bakr, was he the chairman of the South African Cricket Board, invited him to come and see the work they were doing in the townships. And David went. And a lot of people who were anti-apartheid were opposed to him for going. It seemed disloyal in a sense. It was before Mandela was released. It was before the negotiations for multiracial society or government in South Africa. So I thought that was courageous too. It's one thing to stand up to somebody because they oppose very strongly your views, but it's also difficult to stand up to people who broadly agree with your views, because you think that the time had come to recognize and go and see for himself what had happened. So those are a couple of things I remember about David. That was one question. And the second question was, what are my memories of that SGM? And somebody asked me in one of the questions I saw, you asked me what I learned from the situation. You, John, did. Because I can still see John on my screen. The SGM, I was pretty frightened of. I was teaching at Newcastle University at the time, and I set off to drive down at 5 o'clock in the morning to go and meet David Shepherd at my parents' house in Ealing, where I was brought up, and talk to him about the thing in the evening. And two things happened. One was there was a terrible fog. And instead of it taking about 5 hours to get down from 4 or 5 hours to get down from Newcastle, it took about 8 or 9. So I didn't arrive until tea time. The meeting was probably starting at 6 or 6:30. So we had a very rushed time. And secondly, to discuss how we would present the case, we hadn't done much. There was no email, of course, and we hadn't done much in the way of communication about it until that day, which was shocking to me now. I would be very, very more nervous than I would have been then. But I was very nervous then. And one thing I realized was that it didn't matter if you said the same thing as other people. The important thing was to say what you felt in your own way, not in somebody else's way, with their particular humor or style, in your way. that's what a meeting is. And I had thought, I had to be awfully careful not to repeat what David, which was so stupid, I realized afterwards. So that was one thing I learned from that situation. But another thing I learned, and I wasn't very good at the speaking that I did, I don't think. Another thing I learned is that people in positions of power can be arrogant, they can be patronizing, and they can be dishonest. Like that man whose name I can't even remember now, who was the foreign minister. I thought he was all three of those things. He flew down to a special meeting of the committee where they invited into the room David and me before this SGM to try to persuade us not to hold it, to withdraw our request for it, and somebody else from our committee, our little group. And Hume, he was called. What was his first name? Alec Douglas Hume. He had flown down from Edinburgh all the way for this meeting, and he was very annoyed at having had to do it. And he thought of me as a sort of 26, as a young sort of ignorant schoolboy. And he thought of David Shepherd as not much better. And that's how he spoke to us. And, that we didn't understand anything about politics or how things were decided. And of course, you wouldn't ask a foreign government questions that they wouldn't give you answers to, Whereas in fact, they had asked questions and they did know the answer, or they had a pretty good idea about what the answer would be if D'Oliveira was picked. This was months before. That was in March of that year, whereas the selection, of course, was in August and finally in September. So I thought I learned something about groups in power. Not that everyone was like that by any means, but I did learn that about him, or that was my impression. What else did I learn? Oh, I learned what I said before about speaking in one's own way and not necessarily, exactly dovetailed into what somebody else is saying. Oh, and I also learned something else. I spoke at a meeting chaired by Peter Hain, where there were people who were willing to be much more confrontative, even occasionally, a few of, not very many, but one or two of them, to be sort of violent or do damage to things, about the Stop the 70 Tour campaign. And I realized, partly from Peter Hain saying it, that actually, it's a point about political groupings of all kinds, that you need people from with different points of view, but you have to join together for a particular purpose. So you can't refuse to speak because you don't agree with everything that everyone else who's campaigning on the same topic says. So that was another thing I learned.
Thank you. What excellent questions from Peter and John. Yes. Thank you. And a really interesting answer. Well, we've got another two-parter now. So I'm going to ask Lionel Frumpkin and David Silverman, please, to ask their questions together before Mike answers. Lionel, would you like to come in first, please?
Yes. Good evening, Mike, and thanks for joining us.
Good evening. Thank you.
My friend John Embry considers you by far the best captain he ever played under. How would you return the compliment describing the spin twins, Embry and Edmonds?
Thank you, Lionel. And while we're on Middlesex, I've got a question from David Silverman. David.
Hi, Mike. I was lucky enough to follow Middlesex in the 70s and 80s when we were doing so well under your captaincy. I don't know if you still follow the team, but if you do you have any thoughts about our current lack of success? And may I just add a couple of brief things about your father, which may interest you. After cricket, I very often used to go to a concert at the Queen Elizabeth Hall where he was stewarding, and he was very keen to know the latest score from Middlesex. We had some very interesting chats. And then on the other occasion when Middlesex were playing, I don't know if you were still playing at the time, and he was present and he stood up in the grandstand and took a catch.
Did he?
Yes, we all felt it should count for Middlesex, but maybe it should have counted for Yorkshire.
Thank you. Yes, well, he did. He did steward at and he was. I think the stewards were allowed to go into half the concerts, either the first or the second half, and he loved it. At the Festival Hall or the Queen Elizabeth Hall. But your question, the second question was, Middlesex now. Well, I do follow, but slightly distantly. I mean, I'm still actually quite busy. I still work 3 days a week, seeing patients online at the moment, of course, or it has been for the last year or more. I seem to be very busy one way and another. But I have felt like that for quite a few years. And I haven't been to see Middlesex very much, not as much as I would have liked to do, actually. But I do follow them. I'm a great admirer of Gus Angus. Ferguson. Oh, I'm getting bad on names, as you can see. Gus Fraser. And I'm very sorry that they haven't done better. I was very excited when we won the championship in 16. This year, we've got more bonus points than anyone else, and we've lost more matches than anyone else. So he's obviously done well in the first innings, and then we've done terribly in the second innings. I have no idea why that should be, but obviously they should look at that. I don't know why we're not doing as well as we'd hoped. I really don't. And it is disappointing. Now, as to Embers and Philip, very different pair of characters, both very, very fine bowlers. I'm very flattered by John Embury, who's a shrewd chap and doesn't hand out accolades too easily, I don't think. So I'm very flattered and pleased with what you quote him as saying. But as for the two of them, Philip was a bowler with, I think he had the potential to be an even better bowler than he was, and he was a very fine bowler. He could bowl balls on good batting pitches that would beat good players who were set all ends up, and occasionally, you know, he would pitch middle, straight and down the line, hit the top of middle or off stump. You know, I remember him once bowling Keith Fletcher out like that on a very good pitch at Lord's. And he had a I would say a perfect action, strong body action, very high, beautiful action, curved the ball in, spun it away, made the ball bounce. John Embury was, I would say, one of the shrewdest bowlers I ever came across. Like Fred Titmus, he swung the ball away, he drifted it. He didn't spin it as much as Philip. He had a slightly lower arm action than Philip did. And occasionally, if he didn't get it right, he'd undercut the ball and it wouldn't spin, it would more slide on. He was a terrific bowler on green pitches, as Fred Titmus was, and he'd often get the game back under control, you know, when somebody had gone for quite a few runs. John, I think, developed over his career. When he came to Middlesex from Surrey, he was a poor, porky batsman, didn't lift his bat up at all, and hardly scored any runs. And he worked out a technique for batting, you know, that suited him. It was unorthodox, and he became a really, really useful late middle order, early tail end player, number 8 or 9, county cricket, number 9, perhaps, or 10 for England. Anyway, he was so he made the most of all his talent, which was considerable talent, of course, but he made the most of it. Philip, I thought, didn't learn as much as he might have done. He was difficult to talk to get to do something different. At times I thought he was being contemptuous of me if I suggested something. I realized after some time it was often a case of him not being sure he could do what I was suggesting. For example, I might suggest to him that on a certain pitch he bowl a little bit slower, let the ball go just up out of his hand a little bit, rather than slightly like that, if you can see what I mean. It's sort of that. Bishan Bedi was the master of being able to change his wrist so that he could bowl it like that and spin it more, or like that and swerve it or undercut it more and curve it in towards the batsman. And you could hardly see it in his action. And I think Philip felt unsure that he really could trust himself to bowl more slowly, for example, at times in his career. Embers would sometimes argue against me. He said, no, I don't want to bowl it slow. I want to bowl it the way I'm bowling it. And I'd say, all right, Embers, we'll try it that way for a while and see how it goes. And if nothing happens, try it my way. Bowl a little bit slower, a little bit more outside the off stump. I don't mean my way for all conditions. I mean on that particular day. So I found them very different to deal with. They got on well together, I think, and they were a great pair. Of course, Fred Titmuss was the other fantastically fine spin bowler that we had at Lord's. And I don't know who you'd say was the better bowler, or indeed all-round cricketer between him and John Embry. I think they were on a par. I think they were both brilliant, shrewd, mean, niggardly, hated giving runs away, wanted fielders to save both a 1 and a 4, wanted one short leg for the price of 2. You know, they were of a type in a way, but, you know, terrific.
Thanks, Mike. As a Surrey member, I can't get too sorry for Middlesex. They've done pretty well over the last few years, but I suppose as a London side or a side based in London and based at Lord's, I have to hope they're going to do a little bit better soon. Next question then, please, from my co-host, Paul Graber. Paul.
Hi, and it's another question which relates to Middlesex cricket, but going back a few years, I have memories of being at I think it was a Gillette Cup semi-final against Sussex in the late 70s, when you and Imran Khan appeared to come pretty much close to blows, relating, I think it was, to the speed and hostility with which Wayne Daniel was bowling. I was just wondering what your memories of that incident were and what your relationship, if any, with the Prime Minister of Pakistan is like these days.
No, I haven't had much to do with him. He hasn't consulted me on how to lead Pakistan, I must say. Wisely. Yes, I remember it. I remember it well. It was wasn't it a Benson? Was it a Gillette Cup or a Benson Hedges? It was quarter-final or something.
I thought it was a Gillette semi, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, it might. You might be right. It was a murky day at Lord's. It wasn't a very easy pitch. We might have scored 180, which wasn't a bad score in those days on those conditions, and against their bowling, because they had a pretty good bowling side as well. And we got 4 of them out, and Imran came in. So naturally, I brought Wayne back on as soon as Imran came in, because he wasn't a great player of bowling such as he himself purveyed, you know. And Wayne bowled 1 or 2 short balls that came through like sort of waist height, chest height. And Imran started to look at the clouds and complain about the light, and make representations to Jack Van Geloven. Sometimes the names come back to me. He was the umpire, one of the umpires, the umpire at the pavilion end from which Wayne was bowling. And Jack Van Geloven, I thought, might succumb to these persuasions of Imran Khan to take us off for bad light. And I went up and I said something like, don't listen to him. It's just that he's complaining because he couldn't get it up, you see, which was a slightly naughty allusion. And Imran started to march towards me, I think with his bat held up. But I actually think the main problem came because Mike Gatting, young player, fielding at mid-on, who'd seen too many football matches, was it his cousin who played for Arsenal at the time, came rushing up to me and pinioned me from behind to stop me attacking Imran, allegedly. And I would then turn my anger on Gat for not leaving me alone. I wasn't going to try and hit Imran, and I didn't think he was going to try and hit me. So it was all made, it was blown up. And we stayed on and we got them out for about 120.
Thank you. Thanks, Mike. Next question comes from Ben Knighton. Ben.
From county to globe. What went wrong after tea in the second World Cup final at Lord's in 1979, please? Wisdom has it, when Brearley went, England wanted 158 from the last 22 overs. This looked to be out of the question, and so it proved. Why depend so much on boycott as batsman, 17 overs to reach double figures, and bowler with cap back to front, 0 for 38 off 6 overs, when there was so much experienced talent in the squad? What was wrong with Jeff Miller as 5th bowler? I was there, and the prolonged frustration of the crowd was palpable.
all your names up here, but no picture.
Sorry, not me.
Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I'll go ahead. Well, that's a painful question, I find. First of all, with regard to the balance of the team, one problem was that Bob Willis was not fit for the match, and he would have been one of our key bowlers. The second issue was that in the match before at Old Trafford against New Zealand, we'd played 7 batsmen, 4 bowlers, plus Gooch, Boycott, or Wayne Larkins to bowl the other, what was it, 12 overs in those days, or 11, or anyway, whatever it was. And Derek Randall came in at number 7 and won the match for us, both with batting and with fielding. And Boycott had bowled several overs successfully. He wasn't so easy to score off. It was like some of those New Zealand bowlers they used to have in World Cups who bowled medium pace. Graham Gooch used to regard playing against New Zealand with Richard Hadley as playing against the world 11 at one end and Ilford third 11 at the other. But anyway, that was rather unkind on Ilford third 11, I think, and on New Zealand. Anyway, so we picked a team on that basis, and as things turned out, hindsight being what it is, it was a mistake because the last bowler went for about 70 odd runs, putting together Boycott and others, and then there was the batting after tea. The second thing to say is that 290, which the West Indies have got, was it 290? Well, first of all, they'd been 99 for 4. And if we'd had a little bit more fast bowling, because spin bowling wasn't going to get anyone out on there, they might not go for that many runs, but it wasn't taking any spin. We might have got them all out for 150 or something like that, but of course it wasn't to be. And they've scored 130, and Collis King scored, how many?
Collis King was devastating.
So, but you must also remember that in the semi-final, the other semi-final, West Indies against Pakistan, Pakistan had an even better batting side than we had. And it was an even faster scoring ground and pitch at the Oval on a dry summer. And they had been defeated by 60 or 70 runs as well. Not many teams were going to beat the West Indies with their bowling side against that score. But I think that perhaps you imply this, 79 for no wicket off 25 overs at tea was not too bad. I think the West Indies might have been worried, but I agree with you entirely. One of us had to get out straight after tea. Probably it should have been me because I was allegedly in charge. And I was wrongly dissuaded from this course of action by, of all people, Derek Randall, who said, keep going, this is exactly right. This is, the old pro attitude, which I had too, which was don't throw wickets away, you can always score faster towards the end. But of course, towards the end, it was getting darker. There was Joel Garner and all the rest of them. And there was the possibility of putting 9 fielders on the boundary because there were no circles. So you're quite right. And I think it was a bad mistake, probably one of the worst mistakes I made.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Ben. We've only got another 10 minutes. I want to try and get as many questions in as possible.
Yes.
So just a quick question here from an old school friend of yours, I believe, Jeff Bates. Jeff.
Yeah.
Okay, Mike, good to see you. You were a talented Eton Fives player, and so was Eddie Craig, and also Peter May was unbeaten. And all 3 of you played together in the last Gentlemen versus Players match in 1961. But my question, I think you may also have got a lacrosse blue. So my question really is, what other sports did you play, and did they help develop or complementing your cricket skills, either mentally or physically?
Well, in my time, I played soccer at school until we changed over to rugby, which was pretty early on. So I played rugby. I didn't really like rugby, it's a bit too rough. But hockey, I almost played for Cambridge at hockey, and I played for college and so on. I played for the university second team. Eton Fives, I wasn't any good at rackets games. I don't know why, squash, tennis, I even tried rackets and real tennis. And I don't know quite why that was. I could never serve at tennis for a start. But as for whether these sports helped my cricket, I should have thought they probably did. In those days, you played winter sports in the winter and cricket or tennis or whatever in the summer. So, you know, it wasn't a matter of people playing for 9 or 10 months of cricket a year, or 9 or 10 or 11 months of football a year. So I think all the sports were basically enjoyable, basically team games. Eton Fives was only pairs, and marvelous. I mean, lacrosse was a wonderful game. The only thing is, really, it's kind of the ball's hard and you can be chopped on the hands as a sort of form of tackling. And it was a much better game the higher level it was played at, you know, because the ball would go quicker and the dexterity of the players was such, and it wasn't a matter of brute strength as it sometimes could be.
Thank you. Next question then, please, from John Hegarty. Heggers.
Thank you, Mike. This has been so much fun tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
Before I ask my question, you've brought back sort of golden years for me. My best year at Lord's was Vincent van der Bijl's one season.
Yeah.
It was absolutely marvellous. And you talked about Fred Titmuss as a great bowler.
Yeah.
I was there when he came down from the stands and took 3 wickets against Surrey. And it was absolutely marvellous.
Yeah.
Excuse me. My question's a bit cheeky. You chaired the World Cricket Committee for a number of years. As a member, it feels like it's a bit of a luxury for our club. Do we really need it? Does it add any value? And I was always rather disappointed until quite recently that it was on the supply side of cricket and didn't really talk to the customer's experience.
Well, I suppose you'd expect me to disagree with you, which I do. So I've written a word down here which I can't read. One is that the club, I wrote down the words world image, and the club sets itself out to be, and has a right to set itself out to be, as the home of cricket worldwide. Where do we, in the old days, of course, it was colonial, and we had charge of cricket and laws of cricket, sometimes shared with Australia between Gubby Allen and Don Bradman, and sometimes just done by ourselves. And we thought this was the natural place for us to be. And quite rightly, since then, we have changed, like the House of Lords, from being the governing body of the country to being an advisory group. So I would say that apart from the laws, there isn't really another international role for cricket than the World Cricket Committee. So that's one argument. Secondly, it is a luxury in another sense, that it allows people to consider what they think, people who are experts as ex-players, ex-international players, or ex-international umpires or administrators, those people, mostly players, to consider issues primarily and sometimes solely, but never completely solely, from the cricketing point of view. What's the best for the game? What's the best for the international game? What's the pinnacle of the game, which has always been, in my experience on the World Cricket Committee, Test cricket? What is it that we can add to that debate that is taken to the ICC, where the power lies, like something that is taken from the House of Lords to the House of Commons, or to the Cabinet, if the House of Commons ever has any power since left now. But in other words, it's an advisory group of experts who think about the issues of the game, I don't know, time wasting, bouncers, one-day cricket, limited overs cricket, the weight of bats and the power of bats, the balance between bat and ball. I don't know, all sorts of questions and issues that come up. Is it cheating to run someone out who's backing up too far? You know, all those kinds of questions from a cricketing point of view. There are plenty of people, I think, who consult the customers and whose job it is to consult the customers. And sometimes that's part of the problem, that we consult the customers, you know, because we've got a game which is liable to have Test cricket knocked off the pinnacle by the proliferation of limited overs cricket, which I like, and nothing against, but there's no windows for Test cricket. It's becoming more and more squeezed into little pockets. And I think that was one of the groups that actually fought to keep Test cricket as the primary aim of the game.
Thank you. Do we have time for one more question, Mike? Is that all right?
Yes, certainly.
Okay, well, let's Richard Norman, and you did send in quite a long question. If you could try and keep it as brief as possible, because we need to finish shortly after 7 o'clock. Richard.
Of course I will. I can't see Mike now. What's happened to the screen?
No, we can see you. Go ahead.
You can hear me?
We can.
Oh, I see. Thank you. Well, good evening, Mike. In 1999, Ted Dexter and Colin Cowdrey formulated the preamble to the laws of cricket, the spirit of cricket. And it was, I think, it was succinct, it was comprehensive, unambiguous. And I think it was approved, welcomed, and respected by members and by cricketers around the world. In 2017, which is the only year in the last 14 or 15 that you were not on the committee, who at the time no longer needed the approval of members for such a drastic move, they ditched the original spirit of cricket and they replaced it with a whimsy text that reads like the idealistic mission statement of a modest charity or something. It is utterly weak and impractical, unsuited to the real world, and in my opinion, it makes a laughing stock of the club. At the same time, I can't understand the coincidence, on account of worsening behaviour in the recreational game, they introduced Law 42 players' conduct, and Law 42 is 9 pages long. It includes ICC-inspired levels 1, 2, 3, 4 offences and includes professional football-style sin bins. Is that what we want? The question is, are you happy with the new law involving levels of offences and sin bins? Or would you prefer to have retained the spirit of cricket as it was and simply legislated that, given sufficient warnings, if in the opinion of an umpire, a player is without the spirit of cricket, not playing within the spirit of cricket, he should be required to leave the field. Full stop, no sin bin. If you don't play within the spirit of cricket, you shouldn't really be here.
Well, thank you. You give me the chance to show off my last book, which is called Spirit of Cricket. And I mean, my answer's in there, actually, to your questions, really. But I think that one needs reference to the laws so that there can be less ambiguity about what's proper, especially what's legal and what's not. But there's more to cricket and life than legality. And that's where spirit comes in. And I think that you've got to get the laws as accurate and as clear as you possibly can, like the laws of the land. Many of them are there in order to promote the right spirit of fairness and fair play and so on. I don't just mean in cricket, I mean in laws as well. And in religion, you talk about the letter of the law and the spirit of the religion, or the spirit that counts. But you need spirit as well. And what I would put as my preamble, which I put on the last page of my book, was simply this: all those involved in cricket should respect the integrity of the game. On the field and off it, the spirit of cricket asks us to play hard but fair, and let's not lose the essence of the word play. It's much shorter than either of the other versions. And although it's not completely serious, I mean, it's slightly, you know, there to arouse discussion and playfulness. I think it's basically right. I think it bears out half of what you're saying, namely that when it comes to spirit that goes beyond the law, you can't really spell it out in absolute detail, and it just becomes tedious and platitudinous. I don't think so well of the 1999 and 2000 set of preamble either, myself personally. I thought it was too long and too many negative things. But I think that the recent one was better than that, personally, unlike you. But I still think that it could be shorter and simpler, as I've just suggested. And spirit of the game, it's like recommendations or maxims from religious leaders. And in all religions, do as you would be done unto. You could call it vague. It doesn't tell you the answer to a lot of particular questions, but it reminds you, it nudges you towards better behavior and thoughtfulness, not only about yourself, but about the other party or the other person. So I think that there's room for spirit of cricket, and there's important things for it to do, and there's important things to argue about and discuss. But I don't think it can all be summed up in a preamble. I think it's all right to have a few words about it, but not more.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Mike, for a wonderful evening's entertainment. May I first just apologise to those who have sent in questions and we haven't had time to get round to them. And thanks also to those of you who have asked the questions and all who have been able to join us tonight. I'm going to ask John Fingleton in a minute to wrap up for us. But before I do so, can I just remind you, we've got one last Q&A to come. John's probably going to tell you about that as well, but let me do so. We're looking forward to welcoming Michael Holding on Friday the 28th May, again at 6 p.m. That's Friday the 28th May, Michael Holding, and that's the last one of this series. So, Fingers, would you like to sum up for us today, please?
I certainly would, James. Thank you very much. And I won't say a word about the next one, though I'll get it wrong again, I'm sure. You've just done it. I've written down a couple of notes. Candid, fascinating. Rodney Hogg was dead right when he said that Mike had a degree in people. It's one of the most enjoyable talks and question and answer sessions I've heard this entire series. Absolutely fascinating. Mike did refer right at the end to my two least favourite words in cricket, about which I nagged him constantly when he was chairman of the WCC, which were time and wasting. And I never won the battle, but I wish we could, because I think that's one of the worst things in cricket, especially when people are paying a lot of money to go and hear it, watch it, I mean, and are deprived because of either umpires' rules or players needing a drink after 3 balls or whatever. But apart from that, sorry, Mike.
I did quite often agree with you about it.
Well, no, but it didn't change. You and Vince van der Bijl were on my side, but nothing changed.
I know. It's a sad thing.
Anyway, it's been absolutely fascinating. It's been wonderful. And I can't imagine, a series coming towards an end with a better performance. And thank you very much for giving up your time to join us.
Thank you very much indeed.
I'm going to ask now everybody to unmute their microphones so we can give Mike a well-deserved round of applause. So unmute, please.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you.
Thanks again, everybody. Thank you. Hope to see you all again on the 28th. In the meantime, thanks to Mike Brearley. Stay safe and well. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.